What I have done, for those of you who follow my blog, Trotter blog, I've created a page on the blog where I have taken this information plus all other information I can find written about the various streams, and it's grouped per stream. And there's a PDF on there for each of the rivers. So for example, you can go and look at the Moy, and there's a PDF which includes the content of this book, together with all the other articles I could find from magazines and wherever else. Probably broken a couple of copyright rules. You can download it as a PDF. It's quite long, it's about 50 pages if you read the whole thing. But if you really want to immerse yourself, the information is there. So go and have a look at trutterblog.com and Rivers of KZN. It's quite interesting that the title of this was Trout Fishing in Natal. And that's actually not what the book is. It's Trout Streams of Natal. But he couldn't use the title Trout Streams of Natal because Natal published a book in the mid-1950s by that same title. And in fact, I think they should have swapped names, because Natal's book is not about the trout streams in Natal, it's about trout fishing in Natal. Anyway, this is a bit of useless history. But if you can find that book, go for it. You'll either see it in soft cover like this, or you'll see it in hardcover. It's got a sort of dusty brown jacket. Don't be put off by the dusty volume. It's a treasure. That's the area we're going to look at today. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but that's Monk's Cowl and Injasuti in the sort of north of our area, and then down to Giant's Castle and the tent down in the south. Of course, this is Lesotho, and this is KZN, and that's the area there and thereabouts, with a focus on the southern end, quite honestly, that we'll have a look at this evening. So for those of you who don't know it, that's the iconic view of Giant's Castle from the sort of northeastern side. So if you in the vicinity of Escourt, for example, and you look towards the Berg, that's what you'll see. This is the Giant's, he's lying on his back, okay? That's his forehead, that's the tip of his nose, that's his chin, that's his neck, and this is his chest. So he's lying on his back, okay? And then if you go down towards Maritzburg, I live in Hilton, and from the bridge just beyond my house, you look up at the Berg, you see the same mountain, but you see this. That point there is that point there, and you're looking at it from the left. I don't know if you see my cursor, you're looking at it from that angle across to there. So that is also the Giant. So you can orientate yourself, and you're going to see why I'm referring to the Giant, because it's pretty central to all our rivers and streams in KZN in a way that will become clear to you as we go along. Right, that's Monk's Cowl, Cathkin Peak and Champagne Castle either side of it, source of the Injasuti River, very iconic as well, and you can see that also from Hilton, for example. If you look across, you can see the Giant sort of at the left-hand side, and off on the right-hand side, the last mountain you can see on the escarpment is this one here. Okay, so where was I? If you look at a map of South Africa, or KZN and Lesotho, you'll see that the boundary of Lesotho sort of sticks out into Natal, and that point there is the furthest point that it sticks out to the east. And so you can quickly orientate yourself when you're looking at a map. That's the point we're looking at there. This mountain at 3,200 meters is Giant's Castle. And I've drawn this straight line from the peak of Giant's Castle to the top of a very iconic mountain called the Inhlozan Mountain in the Dargor, which I'll show you shortly so that you can familiarize yourself. And that's at 3,200 meters at the Giant and 1,979 meters at the top of the Inhlozan. And if you take that straight line, the lowest point between them is 1,700 meters. So this is generally a sort of, with a little bit of imagination and a bit of an abstract sort of view of it, this is a ridge of high ground that extends out. And I'm going to show you a contour map just now that sort of expounds on that. And just have a look at all these rivers. I've labeled them here: the Bushmans, the Hlatikulu, Little Moy, the Mgeni, the Nzinga, the Leteni. You see where they all rise. They're flowing either side of that ridge. So a little bit of an abstract notion, but it's quite significant. What's significant about that is all of these are brown trout streams. And we don't know why, but if you go north of that, they're rainbow trout streams. If you go south of that to the Underberg area, they're rainbow trout streams. Rainbows have been stocked in most of these rivers and haven't survived. A couple of seasons and they're gone. So we don't know what it is about this mountain or this ridge of high ground, but it somehow favors brown trout. It's quite interesting, isn't it? I think I've got some dots that come up here. There's the source of the Lateni, the source of the Bushmans, the Nkibidwan, the Moy, the Nzinga, the Little Moy, the Hlatikulu, the Mgani, the Lions, and down at the bottom there, the Elands. Can you see how they congregated around that high ridge? It's quite fascinating. And we basically do all our fishing around that ridge. So we set our weather app on Giant's Castle to see how much rain it's had, and there's a whole lot of relevance. Funny enough, on my weather app, I've got a couple of places, but one of them, the first one is Giant's Castle, and the second one is Dargle, which is here. So you have those two on your YR or whatever it is, gives you a nice overview of what to expect. Let me just move. Oh, there's one more source, the Mchezana. There's that contour map I was mentioning. That red line, I just chose the 1600 meter contour. And here's that ridge I spoke about. You can see how it sticks out, the area of high ground sticks out from the berg. The green dots here are just some spot heights, so there are some higher bits of ground around and about this area. The red dots are where these trout rivers cross the 1600 meter contour line. That gives you an idea. That is the Inflozan mountain that I mentioned, 1979 meters at the top of the mountain. And that looks out over the Dargle Valley, which is the valley of the Mgani. A lot of you will know that's my home river and where I grew up. Okay, so that's the area we're going to look at, where I've circled it there, and those rivers, and we'll go through them. I've said it's brown trout country. That's a brown from the Moy. Yeah, let's just run through them. The Elands River, not very well known, relatively low altitude river, a very small river. The only public access to it are two stretches belonging to the Natal Fly, well, not belonging to, but access through the Natal Fly Fishers Club. Very, very seldom fished. Got very small trout in it. We've had a couple of adventurous guys go there in the last 18 months and catch a couple of small trout. So they're definitely there. One of those sort of hidden gems that have actually been long forgotten. And I often punt these little streams because they're an asset that if we don't utilize them, then no one will be there to protect them or put in a good word for them or utilize them, and they'll disappear, you know, in obscurity. And that has happened to a number of our trout streams. People stopped going there, they weren't popular anymore, and they're no longer trout streams because, you know, all sorts of bad farming practices and things happened to them and no one was looking. So I encourage you guys, if you do come down, to get a bit adventurous and try and find out about some of these smaller streams and try and keep them on the map, because it'd be a shame to lose them. That's what the Elands looks like. It's shrouded in these Nchichi or oho shrubs, which keeps it shaded and relatively cool. Makes it quite tricky to fish, but it's what keeps it as a trout stream. And once you get into the stream, it's actually got a very rocky bed, and you can throw a back cast behind you and it's not all that intimidating. So you see that from a distance and think, oh my goodness, have I got enough flies? But when you get there, you see that and realize it's actually a pleasure to go and fish, and a lot of shade on a hot day. The Mgani, my home river, there it is there, to give you the idea of where it sits. You can see it rises a long way away from the escarpment. Arguably KZN's most important river from a water supply point of view, and heavily strained. Feeds the towns of Durban and Maritzburg. Here's some tributaries, the Poort stream that you see flashing on and off there, the Firth stream flashing on and off, and Walters Creek, which has pretty much disappeared into obscurity, but Tom Sutcliffe's early books, you'll see he writes about Walters Creek. That's what the Mgani looks like in its upper reaches. The Mgani, the only people who've got access to that are Natal fly fishers. So forgive me for that, but you know, obviously I'm going to punt Natal Fly Fishers because I think it's a great club to belong to. But if you want access to the Mgani, even amongst the members, not a lot of people fish it. But I can't understand why. Look at that water. Isn't that beautiful? This, incidentally, was totally choked with wattle trees 5 years ago, and it's been cleared through the efforts of the club, and it's just an absolute gem to go and enjoy. That's what it looks like. Not as the trout here aren't as plentiful as the Bushmans and the Moy. On average, in a normal year, when the Moy and the Bushmans, for example, are full of tiny little fish, the Mgani produces bigger fish, but fewer of them. That's a little bit higher up on the farm, sheer down. Beautiful water, really is. Caught some lovely trout up there. Trout, the browns can be pretty belligerent though. You have days where you just can't buy a fish and other days where you do quite well. All part of the formula. The Mgani is generally a bit more lowland than what you might have experienced on the Moy or the Bushman. So this grass growth tends to be high, like chest high. The weed growth is more prolific. You have to fight your way through this a bit, and that puts some people off. Yeah, more trout for me. These are pictures of the Mgani a bit lower down, where it's a more mature stream on Chestnut's farm. That's what it looks like, quite sort of genteel stuff. And that's not atypical of an Mgani brown. You get little ones, but you get plenty that sort of size as well. Really lovely browns. Right, the Moy. This is one of our longest trout streams in terms of from the top to where trout no longer exist is kind of the longest, about 60 k's. How's that? That's the Moy right across the middle there. And I'll paint in the new dam, relatively new. There it is there, the Spring Grove Dam. So pretty much we're looking at the river above the dam, if you're talking about trout water. Yeah, iconic stream, just absolutely stunning. That's on Riverside Farm, which is Natal Fly Fishers Club water, just below Camberg Nature Reserve. That's just below the Tendele beat, which is public access. So just going back to the map here, up at the top you've got access through Izimvelo. Then in this little spot here, you've got Tendele village, where a lot of the competitions are held and where you can buy a day ticket. Then you have the Mollers Farm, which is Natal Fly Fishers Club water. Then you have Stilleris, which is again Parksport, a short stretch of Parksport. River runs through a very flat area, so it's a very meandering river in a Ramsar declared wetland. Then some more Natal Fly Fishers Club water at Riki Lynn, and then down here all private water, I'm afraid. But yeah, at times you'll get access to this water down here. If you've got some mates or you come across someone who's kind enough, you might get access down here. So that was Riverside. That's near Tendele. That fish was caught 2 weeks ago. Lovely fish, about 17 inches. Isn't that a beaut? Sighted and caught. This was taken quite some years ago. This is the bottom reaches of Riki Lynn. Similar size fish, sort of going on 2 pounds. I still work in pounds. That's Riki Lynn again, lower end of Riki Lynn. A lot of these wattle trees have been removed. We spent some money removing wattle trees in 2018, and there's a lot of small regrowth there, but the big ones are gone, which is great. Again, middle section of Riki Lynn, very pretty. And that's an interesting photo. I snapped that just after they had built the Spring Grove Dam, but before it had flooded. And that was what they called the Inchbreakie Falls. And the scheduled trout water was above there. Now the dam floods this, and so there's the risk of species from the dam going up above. Interesting, they acknowledging that they built a weir up above here to stop the species, the smallmouth bass in particular, going up. And unfortunately, they duffed it completely and built it in the wrong place. Didn't tell any of the locals why they were building it. Didn't have any publicity around it. For all those reasons, smallmouth, well, largemouth bass are in the dam, in the weir above here, and they are making their way up the Moy, and we don't know how far they will go. We just hope they won't get to our hallowed waters at the top. So far, so good. Then the little Moy, which I paint in there. A sad story, the little Moy. if you look at the Moy River to the south, which is this line here, which we've just looked at, it runs through relatively rugged territory, certainly until about there. And as a result, there's limited farming on it. Well, should I say minimal cultivation, a lot of beef farming. Unlike that, the Little Moy runs through these very flat lands that lend themselves to dairy farming. So there's a lot of what I call factory farming along the Little Moy, and it really has trashed that river, I'm sad to say. A lot of water abstraction. The river flows get exceptionally low. There's a lot more farming activity and human activity. Largemouth bass have got into the river, and it's really quite a sad loss, because in its mid stretches here, there used to be wonderful, wonderful fishing, but it really is pretty much done and dusted. The top end here in the vicinity of Glengarry, which is a public resort you can stay at, very nice place to stay, actually nice and central for fishermen. But if you stay at Glengarry, there's still some very nice trout fishing on the upper reaches here. So yeah, that's a good base. Glengarry is self-catering, and you can see how you can just drive across to the Moy or drive across to the Bushmans from there. So there's a place I can sort of point you to. And then the Hlatikulu River, which I've painted in there. Interesting, it looks beautiful so much of the time, but in a dry year, it can't sustain a head of trout. So it's relatively unexplored. It doubtless has trout in it, but it's one of those ones that begs a bit of exploration if you can find access to it. We've got no club access to it. It's private water. But I mention it because someone might have a cousin or a brother or a distant aunt who's got a piece of land there, and I'm always hungry for news as has anyone caught a trout there and how's it looking. I'd really encourage people to go and explore these rather than write them off. But there it is, the Moy River system, including the Little Moy. That's what the Little Moy looks like on a stretch that used to be club water, and no one's really visiting anymore because it's got bass in it. So it's a relatively big river. It's still got trout in it. There's no question about that. The Bushmans, many of you will know the Mjazi, or the Bushmans as it's called, this one up here. There's the line there going into the map. Very, very popular at the moment. As I said at the outset, arguably too popular. There's a lot of traffic on the Bushmans, and there's some people who've shied away from it now because it's just got so many people on it, which is unfortunate. But there are still very good fish to be caught. There's no question about that. That's just its tributary, the Nklibiduan and the Mchezana. That's the Bushmans in low flow. That was actually taken in October, but it was a dry year, pretty bony. That's what it looks like. We hadn't had any rain that year. It was still brown, even in October. That's summer for you. This was taken on Snowflake. Snowflake's quite interesting. It's got these little sort of Port Jackson willows that force you to wade to get around them. And when the flow is high like that, the wading can be quite interesting. You can get pretty deep, but very good fish. This is down on the Bushmans River Community Project. I'm hoping some of you have heard of this project. It's basically, a lot of us locals used to go and fish here without ever asking permission. We just sort of parked on the side of the road and off we went and fished. And we've never had security problems. People have always been very friendly. And it just felt like an injustice, because over the hill, you've got a commercial farmer who's being paid a fee by a club or what have you for his water. And the people who need a fee like that the most were unaware of the asset they've got, and they were getting nothing. So we intervened and started up this project where we've marked it into beats, made it publicly available, nicely controlled numbers, 2 rods per beat, 2 or 3 rods per beat, I think it is. Beats are 2.5 Ks. And if you go and book a ticket there, some money's going back into the community. So I'd encourage you to use that. The Natal Fly Fishers Club buys a notional sort of 50% of their tickets, but it's on a first come, first served basis. But you as a member of the public you'll find it on the Natal Fly Fishers Club site. I think it's on my site as well. You look under day tickets on Natal Fly Fishers Club, and you'll find the cell phone number of Sylvia Mbata, who is the secretary to the king there, and she will arrange to meet you and sell you a ticket for $150, and you can go and fish this. And there's some wonderful fish that come out of there. Gets a bit milky after rain because it does go through this sort of rural area with the wattle and a bit of overgrazing, but wonderful fish. That's a small one. Yeah, some some habitation. You might have a bit of taxi music while you're fishing. It's all part of the cultural experience, but it's worth it. And great fish to be had. That some of you might recognize that person. That's Sean Footer, fishing just above Snowflake in the reserve. My dear friend Roy Ward, late Roy Ward, fishing in the Giant's Castle Reserve. Beautiful mountain stream, just classic. You're more likely to bump into anglers here though than on any other stream on the Bushmans. And I know in a couple of weeks' time, the national competitions are taking place here, and it's known for that. So you will find a lot of us shying away from the Bushmans. Yeah, then there's some minor streams. I've got them here in the Carkloof area. And again, these are small streams that are not publicly accessible. You need to know someone, but I mention them because the picture would be incomplete without them. And also because I'm keen for people to explore them and keep the lore alive, because they are at risk of having no one looking at them, no one caring for them or looking after them, and they need a voice. And us fly fishermen, I think, play a role there. You know, if we really enjoy these streams and we write about them, we speak about them, we photograph them, we become champions of those streams where no one else is. You know, no one else is looking out for them. And even to a farmer, if he knows that the stream running through his farm is revered as a trout stream, he will automatically take more care of it, because you'll be surprised. These farmers actually take pride if they know that it's a valued asset. If no one's ever bothered to ask, they don't consider it a valued asset. They won't keep the cattle out of the stream. They won't give a thought to pumping more water out of it. So we all owe it to ourselves and future generations to try and maintain an interest in these places and visit them, and just signal by visiting them to fish them that in fact we do care about them. And there's no reason why, with the right degree of care, these shouldn't be trout streams 100 years from now. With no care whatsoever, they definitely won't be. That's the tragedy. So there they are. That's the Ndezi. That is the Yarrow and the Jacksons that goes into it. There's some other little ones, the Inyamvubu, which is on the road between Moiriva and Greytown. The Jacksons I've mentioned, the Heronvale stream up at the top end of the Umkomaas catchment, and the Mvoti, which flows off the back end of the end of the Carkloof towards Greytown, all on private farms. But I mention them anyway. You might know someone, and if they mention this, I'd encourage you to say, hey, can we come and fish it and see what's in it, and take an interest in it. I think my little talk here is very short because really this lends itself more to a chat. So I think that was pretty much my last slide, but I'd really like to just chat and field questions for the rest of it, because I'm sure you must have some of those. So yeah, it's been quiet from the floor, but fire away. I'll answer your questions as best I possibly can.
Andrew, we've got a question there from Stuart. He says, what's the fishing like in the Camberg Reserve upstream from Tendele?
Very nice, very, very nice. You'll find a lot of small fish generally. If you get a 15, 16-inch fish, you've done really well. Generally very willing to take a dry fly in most situations. The beginning of the Camberg Reserve, if you're moving upstream from Tendele, is very much sort of meadow water. It meanders a lot, and it's thickly lined with those Nchishi bushes, a little bit like what I showed you on the elands. The secret there is just to climb in the river and move up the center of the river. Occasionally you'll get to a pool so deep that it's getting up to your chin, and you might want to climb out and go around. But for the rest, if you stay in the river, it's not as difficult as it looks, because you'll be putting your back cast down the tunnel behind you, out of the bushes. If you try and stand on the bank and fish it, you're going to struggle because it's thickly wooded. And then as you go a bit higher up, it gets a whole lot easier. Again, it goes through the veld and it's nice and clear. There's a piece, the top piece used to be a private farm within the Camberg Nature Reserve. And anyone who's visited it sort of 30 years ago will know that it used to be a terrible jungle of wattle. And for 20 or 30 years, the Esenvale, or the Parks Board, as we call them, used to call them, they've cleared it and got it back to grassland. But unfortunately, it is thick with brambles at times. It's a sort of work in progress. But yeah, some lovely fishing up there, very pretty stream.
Good. Then Stuart also wants to know, how far can you go up the Moy in the reserve?
You go to the 1800 meter contour, and at that point there is a great cascade of pools above which you won't find trout. It's just too steep a barrier and too thin a stream above. But from that 1800 meter contour down, you'll find trout. So you can do a good long hike up there.
Okay, Therese wants to know, what is Injitsuti like these days? Can one still camp? The staff quarters burned down last year, she says.
Yeah. As far as I know, the staff quarters were, they weren't people's homes. They were their accommodation during the week, and they come from the local community. And I don't quite know how it works, because there are a lot of the staff there who a truck ferries them backwards and forwards every day anyway. So I don't think all the staff stay there. I'm not sure if they've rebuilt those rondavels, but yeah, it's definitely still completely in operation. The campsite's one of the better campsites in the Berg, really enjoyable. Nice and private little nooks into the sort of valley bush. And the Injitsuti is great. Not, it's coming back to my geography lesson there. It doesn't rise off the Giant's Castle Massif or off that ridge. So it's a rainbow trout stream. Lots of free rising rainbows, tumbling mountain stream, very rocky. They're pretty hungry fish. And I would barely fish a nymph there. Fish a dry fly most of the time. Wonderful spot. Not a small fish, but yeah, awesome. And it hasn't deteriorated at all. It's as good as it's always been.
Beautiful. Then tell me quickly, what is happening with Spring Grove Dam? Is it accessible for fishing? Are there trout there or not? Or
Yeah, it's in the early days, it was stocked. Someone put in a whole lot of rainbows. And it's got browns in it because browns were in the river before they flooded the dam. And those fish have managed to breed in the short stretch of river from the head of the dam up to where they built the fish weir. There's just enough breeding ground there that the browns are able to breed to some degree. But it's also got bass in it, and barbel, and probably some carp and all sorts, because when it filled up, it flooded farm dams that had some of those species in. So it's a bit of a mix. But the strange thing about Spring Grove is that the authorities, and I've read the scientific report, it makes no sense to me. They've not allowed public access for fishing because they say it's a risk to water quality. That is the most bizarre and misinformed comment I've ever seen. I mean, the water quality effects are all to do with the factory farming and the dairy farming up above, and recreational fishing can hardly affect it. It's the most bizarre notion. And FOSAF are trying to persuade them to give public access for fishermen. But at the moment is actually, unless you know someone who owns a property that borders on the dam, you can't get to it. And even there, you don't see boats on it, and that's because they've banned boats. Even the landowners who got land going down to it are not supposed to use a boat. I know people do sneak out on a boat, but they've really kept it closed. And not entirely clear why, because I don't buy the story about fishermen affecting water quality. It's bizarre. So yeah, very limited access. I know of people who've got access through a mate, and they've fished the shoreline a bit, and they've caught some quite good trout, but it's generally quite secretive. You don't hear a lot, which is a shame.
Then from Peter, your top 10 flies for the Moy and Bushmans this time of year.
Yeah, I'm a lazy bugger. I'll go and fish a river and keep the same fly on all day, or change once or twice, and I don't get too scientific about it. Generally, your presentation, your ability to remove drag from your drift, and arguably the weight of your fly are going to be more important than pattern specifics. This time of the year, we've got a lot of tall grass, and if it's a windy day, I always use the opportunity to put on a hopper. because hoppers are just such great fun. They're nice and big, and you can see them, and the fish aren't scared off by them plopping on the water on a windy day. And they're big enough and floaty enough that you can put a small nymph behind them without it dragging the dry fly under. So the hopper dropper rig in late summer and into early autumn, like we are now, March and through most of April, is a go-to and a favorite. Yeah, and on these streams, I used to say fish a nymph until you see a fish rise and then switch to a dry fly. But I mean, I've had enough days where no fish rising, put on a dry fly and have a fantastic day's fishing. So on the dries, any of those little parachute dries will do, with a nice visible wing, whether it be pink or white. You don't have to be too fussy about the pattern. A dark fly or a light fly is about as sophisticated as I get, and of course changing the size. On the nymphs, a lot of guys use guns. All they're doing is using enough weight to get down. The pattern is so overwhelmed by the size of the bead that I joke with my mates and say it's actually a lure. I joke and pull their leg and say it's a rapala because you're only catching fish because you're getting it down, not because of the pattern. You're getting it into their zone. Generally, these fish are hungry. They'll eat most patterns. I don't think you need to obsess on patterns. So the bog standards, pheasant tail nymph, hare's ear. If you're wanting to get the fly down crisply and you don't want to be throwing a great big bead, use something sleek like a perdigon or a troglodyte. Yeah, pheasant tail, hare's ear, perdigon, copper john, of course, to get down. Something generic like that. I don't make too much of a fuss of it. You do well to have a little ant pattern because we get pretty hectic ant hatches at times. So that's one hatch where fish might be going wild and you're battling to connect. So you could fish one of those bull beta ants, but get a small one because you carry a big one for by all means as a sort of terrestrial, but carry a small one to match the hatch if there's one of those wild hatches. Caddis always have a place, the elk, LK caddis or the CDC and elk. We get a little dark gray caddis, which is very prevalent. So that's a great one. Difficult to see on the water, so you might want to put an indicator next to it. And the fish will probably take the indicator as well. So I think that speaks to the fact that I'm saying they're not that selective.
Good.
Yeah.
Alfie wants to know, how's the Mkamasi fishing at Vergelegen? Hasn't been there for a while.
Yeah, Vergelegen's got a problem. They had a bizarre thing. They had a land invasion. The locals arrived there and started to hoe up the ground and put poles in to make houses right in the reserve. And at the moment, they've got guards on the hill with R4s and the gate is locked. So there's very little news emanating out of the Umkomaas, unfortunately. Yeah, very tricky and impossible to get a hold of anyone to try and find out how to get in if you can fish it. So pretty much closed doors at the moment. I hope that changes. It's a long way to go as well, so it tends to be lightly fished. But yeah, that's the current situation.
Okay, Mr. DeLay wants to know, is Castleburn area good?
I have an embarrassing hole in my knowledge when it comes to the Underberg area because it's really not that far. It's an hour and a quarter's drive from here up the Underberg Road. Plenty streams full of rainbows, and I just hardly ever go and fish those streams, which is a crying shame, I guess. But I so love my browns, and I've got so much fishing a bit closer that I don't get up there. But yeah, if you have a look again, look at that book that I was punting at the beginning there, the Umzimkhulu, the Umzimkhulwana, the Umzimudi, all worth a visit, all got good populations of rainbows in them. Yeah, a generalization is rainbows tend to be more willing to take a dry fly. It's a real generalization. It's about as true as the idea that rainbows fight stronger than browns. It's true some of the time. But yeah, all those streams have. One of my mates was up there a couple of weeks ago. Had a whale of a time. Also fished the Polela at the resort there. What's it called? I've gone blank. Cobham. Yeah, Cobham's a nice place to camp. Lots of willing little rainbows in that stream as well.
Okay, Jaco would like to know, how is the fishing around Monk Skel?
Yeah, well, Monk's Carl's in Jasuti, which someone asked about earlier. So whatever I said about Monk's Carl holds. Well, perhaps I need to qualify that. The mountain Monk's Carl is the mountain you look onto when you're at Njasuti. If you're talking about Monk's Carl Forest Reserve, is what it used to be called. It's part of the Esemvelo Park. Then you're probably, if that's what you're referring to, then you're actually in the next valley, which is a stream called the Sterkspruit. And the Sterkspruit, very different topography, very quickly gets into warm territory. That valley is highly populated with resorts and cottages and what have you. And it tends to flash flood and then just be a whole lot warmer than the Njasuti itself, which is just over the mountain. So not well known for its fishing, and not a lot of fishing in that valley, unfortunately. The topography doesn't lend itself to great dams, so there are a couple of little ponds at those resorts and things. And that Sterkspruit, yeah, a number of guys have gone and tried and had no luck at all. It kind of should have trout in it, but not great. You need to be on the other side, over the across the other side of Wonder Valley at the Njasuti Resort. Still looking onto the same mountain but from a different angle.
Okay. Only wants to know, any advice for an oak that wants to do a fishing road trip through KZN? That's a very vast question.
Yeah. I tell you what, I don't know if they've got back issues, but I wrote an article on exactly that 1 or 2 issues back in the Complete Fly Fisherman magazine on exactly that. I actually did a sort of itinerary almost of fishing all the streams I've mentioned here, where I actually made it about a camping trip. And just to give it a thread, I called it Camping and Confluences. And I sort of channeled your fishing to each of the streams I've mentioned here, where they have a confluence with another stream or a tributary. And if you've got time and you can get a back copy, I forget which issue it is, but it's only 1 or 2 back. And I've written it up in detail there, including where you might stay. So have a good look at that. That'll really lead you through. But I mean, just to quickly run through it, you could, if you're coming from Joburg, and I've said this in the article, you can start it, and I've modeled it around camping. Are we talking camping or self-catering? Perhaps answer that for me.
Wil jy vir ons net sê daar? Yeah, let's take a general stance.
Okay, so in Jasuti, you can say at the Esemvelo Park, self-catering or camping. Then you come down to the south again at Glengarry, which I mentioned
Sorry,
earlier.
he says he's a student, he wants to camp.
Okay, camping. Well, then my article's perfect because it tells you about camping. But yeah, Njasuti's got camping. Glengarry's got camping. In the Dargle, there's a place I've highlighted there called Mount Park, which has got awesome camping. And then up to Latani, you can camp as well. So yeah, great campsites. Yeah, have a look at that article if you can find a back copy of Complete Fly Fisherman.
Okay, Frik van Staden's got a more general question. He says, how do you see the court battle playing out and it affecting the medium to long-term sustainability of fly fishing in South Africa?
Yeah, a difficult one that. I'm obviously biased in the pro trout camp. I think it seems pretty obvious to me, unfortunately not to the authorities, but it seems pretty obvious to me that they've completely misread the situation. Number one, their risk assessment for brown and rainbow trout, I've read it. I think a grade 10 schoolgirl could have done a better job. Because theirs is a literature review about how invasive trout are in cold countries around the world. In that respect, it's completely misguided for South Africa, which is such a warm country. And playing to that same point in their listing, the listing document for when they did list trout, on the front page, figure 1 has got a map of South Africa, and they've marked it green where they believe trout are a threat. And if you look carefully at the annotation of that diagram, they have based that map on the average annual air temperature. And I have written to them to point out that trout don't live in air because they don't seem to have quite registered that, and that average temperature is irrelevant. It's the maximum water temperature, which is the limiting factor. And if you draw that map with maximum water temperature, all their green shaded area just evaporates in an instant. and they very quickly realize that the trout are in such small pockets. They've already spread to all the areas they could possibly spread to, and they therefore no longer pose a threat because they cannot spread anywhere that they aren't already existent. So that's my view on it. And if they come to that realization, they'll realize that these things are not a threat at all. They also can only remove them from South Africa by putting hideous poisons into all of our rivers. And I think that they will see the wisdom that surely that's not the way to go, and realize that they've got bigger problems on their hands. You know, I'm a conservationist myself, and my time is dedicated to trying to remove bramble and wattle and bugweed, which are by far a bigger threat, and excessive use of fertilizers and what have you. And the tackle on trout is so misguided that I hope sanity will prevail. They'll never be able to eradicate trout. It's physically impossible to eradicate them. In the worst case scenario, if they push through, rules that make it very difficult, they'll shut down the hatcheries. And if they do that, our stillwater fishing will be in peril. But they'll never get rid of our river fishing. So we've done quite a lot to reinvigorate the enthusiasm around rivers, because that'll always be there. So I think my talk is in a way quite relevant, because these trout streams will always be there. They'll never be able to eradicate without committing a hideous environmental crime. And I think enough people will scream from the rooftops to stop that. So at very worst, our stillwater trout might be at risk. And even then, you can thin out populations in rivers and stock them into dams. So, and that can be done at night. So I think they've got bigger problems that they need to focus on. I think we'll be okay, if I had to put it.
I just wanted to say, this is not recorded, but I see it is.
No,
but we won't
I
make it.
I hope you'll trim that bit, yeah.
Getting back to gear, Stuart wants to know, how light would you go on tippet?
Yeah, good question. I look back I mentioned my logbooks at the start, and I look back and I'm embarrassed at the tow rope we used to use when I was a kid. We still caught a lot of fish. I don't know how. We're fishing 4x and even 3x in the rivers. And I'm currently using 7x quite a lot. But if you do come across a better fish on one of the lower stretches, you're a bit silly using 7x. And I still have a fresh wound from that silliness, having lost a magnificent fish the other day on 7x. So most people are using 6x. One of my mates said to me the other day, even that silly, he says, use 5x, don't leave flies in fish. And his little dry flies, he says, if you go too light, you get your fly turns into a tippet twister. We've had a wet year, so we've had a lot of murky water. In which case you'll get away with them in 3x. So you needn't go to 7x like I've been doing. That's a bit of, I've been doing it for a good reason. I've been doing it because I don't like throwing a big bead. So I throw a very compact, very small nymph, and I want it to get down. And I want the minimum tippet resistance. And for that reason, I've gone 7x. And it really helps getting a size 20 nymph down. And you can do that fishing a little 1.6 mil bead, and now you're fishing with a 2-weight rod, and you're not hauling a horrible 4-weight bead. I'm sorry, I hate those things. It's not even fly fishing, you're just lobbing it. You don't have that lovely crisp cast with a curl of a fly line. You're now into lobbing a thing, and I dislike that. Just for myself, the aesthetic is all gone. So I'm fishing a small compact fly, a size 20 nymph, which I've done fabulously well on, by the way, with some quite big fish, 17, 18-inch fish taking a size 20, and I'm using 7x tippet. If the flows were lower and I wasn't having to get the fly down, I would definitely go on to 6x and even a 5x quite quickly. And in terms of clarity of streams, again, we've had so much rain this year that the water is always milky, and you'll get away with 5x with no problem at all. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, good stuff. Right, then Alfie wants to know, how does your approach change fishing browns versus rainbows?
Okay, very good question. Browns are so distinctly different, And just to point that out, a couple of years ago, I had some friends from out of country come and visit, and I sort of guided them. I'm not a professional guide, but I guided them, and it was embarrassing. I was fishing with them as a mate, so I wasn't a guide. I had a rod, and I was catching a whole lot of browns. They actually came from Zim, and they fish for rainbows, and they were struggling. And one of the guys actually came and sat on the bank and watched me for a while, and he said, "Gee, you're fishing in strange places." And I kind of hadn't realized it, but it brought it home to me that I was fishing differently because I was fishing for browns. So a rainbow, you'll typically walk up to a piece of water where there's nice tumbling white water coming in at the top, and you'll chuck your fly in there. Right in the tumbling water where it's sort of rippling and there's a lot of white water, and just on the tongues of that water, and you'll catch rainbows. With browns, with the exception of small fish, you generally won't find them there. You'll find them as the water slows to the tail of the pool. You'll find them in back eddies. You'll find them where there's a bit of muck on top of the water and they'll be sitting underneath it. And you'll find them in exceptionally unlikely places. Piece of flat open water with no apparent cover and a little deep shaded crease in the middle of it. There'll be a brown sitting in there. They'll go into much shallower water right under the bank in the shade. Browns are shade-loving fish. So tufts of grass on the edge, literally centimeters from the edge, in that little line of shade, you'll find a brown sitting in there. You'll find them where a piece of bedrock changes on a distinct line to a sort of gravel or rocky bottom. So there's a change in the bottom there. Yeah, but generally if I had to sort of encapsulate it in a sentence or two, in the quieter water than rainbows. Very, very distinct, very different to the rainbows.
Okay. And how many of the Natal Fly Fishing Club's beats are open for day tickets?
None. And again, a good question. The Natal Fly Fishers Club has built its history, and it's been around for very nearly 50 years now, on a very, very strong relationship with the farmers. And in order to maintain that relationship, harsh as it sounds, we need a member who, when he goes fishing, if he screws up, he's putting his membership at risk. If I go and buy a day ticket, I'm not putting anything at risk. I've paid $150 or $200 or whatever it is. And if I screw it up and the farmer shouts at me, it's, oh, well, and I'm gone back to Cape Town or wherever I came from. So Natal Fly Fishers Club, we actually tell the farmers, and I've been in this position many times where I'm chatting to the farmer about trying to, induce him to give us his water. And I say, if our members screw up and you complain, that guy will get chucked out. And because of that, he's going to behave. And they nod and say, okay, I like that. I like that. So it's not to try and be exclusive. We've actually got space for members, plenty of space. And it's not all that expensive, but we want people to be a member because they are then accountable to their fellow members and their own membership is at risk. And it's such an important one. I often have, with the Natal Fly Fishers, we do an induction with our members where we talk them through that in more detail than I'm going to now. And I often get guys who I can just tell they're saying, and they're not listening. And I say to my wife, that guy's going to screw up. And sadly, they often do. I had one last week, a guy from Joburg, nodding away, and I was chatting to him, and I thought, oh, this guy's not listening. First water he went and fished, didn't read the map, went to the wrong place, irritated the hell out of the farmer, put the water at risk. So a long answer to your question, forgive me, but that's why we don't offer day tickets. We're very receptive to new members. We don't turn people down. We welcome people with open arms, but we want you to have something on the line because the farmer's got a lot on the line too.
So I think what you're saying is join the club, there's space for you. Educate yourself and then
join the club. But I needed to explain why we don't offer day tickets because it might seem a bit snooty and exclusionary, and that's not the intention. We welcome new members with open arms, and we've got space. So join the club. It does mean you have to pay an entrance fee of whatever it is, $500 or $600, and you have to pay. I'm supposed to know what the subs are because I'm the chairman. 800 and something rand a year. but it's not big bucks. Even if you come down a couple of weekends, it'll pay for itself. But it's more about that accountability. Yeah, day tickets, if you want to get day tickets, they're not a lot. There's that Bushman's River community project. You can buy a day ticket there, very welcome. All the Esenvelo parks, you can do that. And Wildfly is deceptive, and I mean the guys no harm, but they've actually got very few waters. They've only got 4 or 5 waters that you can fish if you join. Their website advertises a lot of waters, but those are typically available for their events, which is the corporate challenge. And then there's some waters similarly that you can access if you fish that Camberg festival. So I'm afraid day tickets are quite limited in KZN, but anyway, there it is.
All right, Stuart then wants to know, with the size 20 nymph, do you use a strike indicator, and if so, what type?
Yeah, I either got it behind the hopper, as I described earlier, or I do the silly thing and put an indicator on, and the fish eat the indicator, and then you strike and you foul hook the fish. So rather put a dry fly. But yeah, but seriously, I use an indicator a lot of the time, and I use that New Zealand needle thing, and I'm actually quite passionate about strike indicators and being able to see them. I like to make them small, first of all, because I don't like them splashing. And my mates rip me off. They say, Andrew, what's the point? That thing's so damn small you can't see it. It's supposed to be an indicator, you know. But I use a really small one. But what I do is I vary the color depending on the time of the day. So I've got the New Zealand strike indicator tool, but then I've got a little plastic box in my vest that's got all mishmash of different colors. And a bit of guidance there. I find that on a nice, crisp, sunny morning, I use a chartreuse one, and pink and the pale colors. And then as the conditions get more what I call brassy, and you get more sun in your eyes and you're getting more reflection, you'll battle to see those. Then you go to the dark reds. And dark red and black. Oh, and that's the other thing I do is I mix the colors. So I have a variegated one. It might be a sort of glistening green and red. And as it turns in the current, I can see the green and then I can see the red. Surprising how you can't see it until it turns, and you can see one color and then you can see the other color. So I keep them small. And because they're small, I need to go for those color variations. So that's my advice on strike indicators.
Right. And then Bron wants to know, when does the season close? End of May and open in September?
Correct. Yeah, closes end of May, opens 1st of September. Yeah.
All right, good stuff.
Yeah.
Andrew, there's no other questions. There's Stuart says great info. Thank you very much. I don't know if there's any other questions that's coming from the panel. If so, post it now quickly, please.
I'll use the chance to have a sip of the tea.
There's a lot of thank yous and great info coming through.
Oh, great pleasure.
Okay. Maybe some thoughts on swinging streamers.
Yeah, it's not something I do. I've got nothing against it. I'll say that I've swung a small woolly bugger before. I do that if the water's dirty. Very effective, very effective. So sometimes I've driven a long way to go and fish a piece of river and it's a bit off color. And I'm thinking, flip, these fish won't be able to see the fly. They probably can see the fly, but it's just more for my confidence that I'll then pull out my stillwater box or a fly that I left in my patch from the last time I was fishing a stillwater and swing a woolly bugger. I'm normally fishing a lightweight outfit, a 3-weight or something, so I'm not going to put a huge streamer on. I'll put a size 10 or 12 woolly bugger and swing it. And in dirty water, browns are very tolerant of dirty water, more tolerant than we as fishermen are. I tend to turn up my nose at dirty water, but I'm learning to be a bit more tolerant because the fish are. And I'll swing a woolly bugger, generally a black woolly bugger, perhaps. Interesting thing about that, a couple of years ago, I was fishing on the Moy, swinging a little woolly bugger, and I was missing a lot of fish. And I realized quite late in the day, after I'd missed a lot of fish, what the fish were doing. They smack that thing with their tail to immobilize it, and then they come back and eat it. And they were smacking it, and I was striking and pulling it out of their way, and they would come back looking for it. And I only realized that as the river started to clear during the day, and I saw that happening in front of me and realized why I'd been missing so many fish. So there's an interesting one. Swing that streamer. If they smack it once, just try and resist striking. Wait a bit, and when it smacks it again, then you strike.
Right, Andrew, there's a lot of compliments coming through on your presentation. Frick van Staden says, appreciate your hard work done and your dedication to the sport. And I concur. I think, we've had a lot of presentations on small stream fishing prior to your presentation, but nothing like the way you did it and the contents that you had tonight. So thank you very much. I think it was informative and a great help to the guys going down there and looking for accommodation and water to fish. Brilliant presentation, says Andrew. Very interesting. Bravo. There's a lot of compliments coming through for you, Andrew. So thank you very, very much for your time.
Well,
and your effort.
great. Well,
We
great
really
pleasure.
appreciate
Come and enjoy it. We've got some great streams. They're really awesome. Bring your tent or whatever. Come down and enjoy them and appreciate them for the wonderful streams they are. So yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah.
Good, great stuff.